Now, for more on child labor in Myanmar and the country's economic future, let's bring in an expert in the region, Christina Fink, Practice of International Affairs Professor at George Washington University. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Now, Christina, help us first understand just how widespread is this in Myanmar?
Well, the estimates are that about 20% of children between the age of 10 and 17 are engaged in child labor. So that's almost, well, about 1 in 5 children.
And a lot of people are wondering, how did we get to this point? You have child labor can arise for a number of reasons, whether it's from instability or in some cases sanctioned by the government in countries like North Korea, Eritrea, and others. So what about Myanmar? What specifically drove it to this point?
Well, there are 2 key factors. One is the fact that most families are living in abject poverty and they need their children to work in order to enable the family to survive. And the second reason is the poor quality of the education system and the fact that education is actually quite expensive for people in Myanmar. So many families just cannot afford to send their children to school.
So with that being said, and child labor being now so integrated into the economy, does an economic boom make things worse then? Do you need more child labor? Like, what happens in that situation?
Well, I think one thing that you need to understand about the economic boom is that a lot of the money is being made in real estate, so that's not really drawing in more child labor, and also in the sale of natural resources, in particular oil and gas. So in those areas, we don't see a greater demand for child labor, but it's also true that there are now more garment factories and also construction, and those are industries which are pulling in a lot of child labor. And you have unskilled children competing against unskilled adults for jobs, but of course the children can be paid less, so there's an incentive to use children instead of adults.
And outside of the garment industry, are there any other major sectors that are really using child labor more so than others?
Domestic servants, so a lot of girls, for instance, work in people's houses doing cleaning, cooking, and other kinds of assistance in the home. For boys, it's often fishing, agriculture, and tea shops. So here in the United States, we go to coffee shops, but in Myanmar, people go to tea shops, and most of the waiters at tea shops are underage boys.
And the other issue that you mentioned was the education, how it's out of reach. What's the government doing then to perhaps make that more accessible, to get more children out of that?
Yes, the government has started investing more money in schools. So for many students, there's no school near their home, so it's just out of reach. There may be an elementary school in their area. They may go through elementary school, but then the nearest secondary school is miles and miles away. So transportation is just too expensive for them to be able to go. But under the last government, over the last 5 years, the investment in education increased dramatically. So many more schools have been built, many more teachers have been hired, and hopefully that will go some way toward keeping more children in school.
Now, what about some of the incentives? You have some of these companies who've taken it upon themselves to eliminate child labor. But what are some of the incentives when you have something that's so entrenched in the economy?
Yeah, well, I think it's quite difficult because both children and parents feel like it's the right thing for children to be doing. They believe that their children are helping the family survive, and children feel a real obligation to their parents to help their household. So you really have to change the values of families, not just what companies are doing, for people to believe that no, children actually really need to be in school. And then there need to be opportunities for children to be in formal education or else in vocational training so that they can get skills that will enable them to get better jobs in the future.
Now, given the pace of the progress, obviously we've seen them make some commitments. Enforcing them is another issue.
Right.
Is that the main issue?
Well, I think that's one of the key issues. I think, you know, because a lot of people don't feel like they should enforce these regulations. So there are new laws that are going through the parliament that should address some of these gaps in the law. I mean, in Myanmar, you're an adult from the age of 16 on, and from the age of 13 to 16, you are allowed to work 4 hours a day, according to the current law. So changing those laws is important, but also changing the mindset of people who are enforcing the laws to come around to the belief that it's not helpful for the economy, for families, for children to be in these jobs.
And just lastly, Christina, as we see that Myanmar is moving towards more of a democracy,
yes.
In terms of the concerns that perhaps the trading partners might have, what do you think could be a long-term economic impact if Myanmar continues this practice?
Well, I think it makes the companies look bad because I don't think people in other countries want to be wearing clothes, for instance, that were produced by 10-year-olds or 11-year-olds. So I think that there will be consumer pressure on companies that are using child labor in the future. And so if the situation isn't being dealt with within Myanmar, the pressure will probably come from outside the country.
All right, we'll have to leave it there, but a great discussion, lots to explore there. Christina Fink, Practice of International Affairs Professor at George Washington University. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
If you like what you just saw, follow us on social media and visit our website, cctv-america.com.